Joining me now to discuss Betsy Woodruff, Ford O Connell, and former Congressman Tom Tancredo. Tom, Congressman, let me ask you, this is a really highly anticipated meeting, a lot of contentious going back and forth, first on Twitter, then there was the abrupt cancellation of the meeting with the president of Mexico. How do you see this all playing out? Because we do have a lot of commonalities with respect to commerce, trade, even fighting drug trafficking.
We certainly do. But there's also something that I'm assuming the Trump administration is well aware of, and that is that it is in Mexico's interest. Every country does what is, or supposedly does, you would think we should too with regard to immigration, but every country does what's in their best interest. And it is in the interest of Mexico to keep that border open, to keep the flow of people into this country from Mexico as robust as it possibly can, and it means legally or illegally, because of several reasons. One, just the unemployment rate for people in Mexico, 18 to 25, is around 40%, or at least it was when I was in the Congress, and that's a very dangerous situation. And so they want to export their unemployment. They also recognize that when they export people to the United States, those people send a lot of money back to Mexico. At the time I was in Congress, it was the second highest source of income, second only to Pemex, which now they have, of course, jettisoned. But the reality is it's in Mexico's interest to keep it. That's why it's so strange, is it not? Doesn't anybody else think it's weird that Mexico, have you ever seen another country so intent upon getting rid of their own people? It's amazing and embarrassing. But I think they have to keep that in mind as they enter into negotiations with this government, with that government.
Betsy, and to that point, last week's stories that Mexico was spreading as much as $50 million to the consulate here to pay for illegal immigrants, to pay their legal bills, to jam up our court system and delay any legal efforts made to deport them.
Which is really interesting, given that our immigration courts are currently already extremely jammed. The question of how functional the immigration court system that we have right now is, has itself been something of a under-the-radar scandal going back for years. There's a backlog of upwards of almost 500,000, if not more, cases in the immigration courts. So it's not like Mexico would need to do very much to make those courts that much more clogged. The reality is that expanding immigrant detention and expanding deportation proceedings is going to make that problem worse. So one of the first things that Jeff Sessions is going to have to deal with as Attorney General is figuring out if he'll change the way those immigration courts work, because those courts are part of the Department of Justice, which he now helms. It's a really important issue, gets very little media attention, but it has major consequences for how our immigration policy works.
You know, Ford, you think about, I think these remittances now have actually superseded oil the last time I looked at the record. So they are protecting something of an investment, $25 billion a year. But then you look again, you're going to have Rex Tillerson down there talking about common sense stuff in a non-acrimonious way, to saying, hey, we do have certain issues. We do a lot of trading with each other. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars, but the drug trafficking alone has killed thousands of Mexicans. The idea that they would somehow allow or harbor that, to Congressman Tancredo's point, to the detriment of their own people, is mind-boggling.
Well, let's be honest. Congressman Tancredo's absolutely right. Mexico is mooching off the United States. They want to protect their $25 to $27 billion in remittances. That's why they're jamming up the court system. But understand why Donald Trump's right, even though this looks very chaotic. He is in a position to, for the first time in 25 years, to actually make Mexico stand up and do what's right. The problem here is that Mexico has absolutely zero interest to do what's right. And now Donald Trump understands between immigration and trade, we import 1/4 of the Mexican economy. And if he can push those two levers right, we can have a great relationship for the next quarter century between U.S. and Mexico. But Donald Trump has got to keep the pressure on early and often, and he's wise to send in Tillerson and Kelly. Tillerson on NAFTA, Kelly on immigration, and particularly making sure that Mexico protects its own southern borders, because let me tell you something, our problems aren't just coming from Mexico, it's who Mexico is pushing through. They're not only pushing their own people in the United States, they're pushing half of South America.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. In fact, in more recent years, we've had net exflow of Mexicans, but they're still, of course, the largest from South America. And Congressman, I'm going to get back to that idea. President Trump obviously has not been intimidated at all, but more recently we've seen Nieto from Mexico, who has extraordinarily low approval ratings, gone for broke, if you will, saying, hey, I've got nothing to lose. So we've got the ultimate game of chicken, and it's a double-edged sword. Trade works that way. Mexico needs us a lot more than we need them, but we get some mutual benefits out of the relationship. So what's the end game here?
Well, who knows? I can tell you that the president of Mexico, this president of Mexico, is certainly, he's not unique in his in the way he portrays himself to the Mexican people. In fact, most leaders in Central America are the same way. They do not want to be seen as being the lackeys of the United States. They want to be seen by their people as being strong, standing up against them. As I said, though, the bizarre part of this is that in standing up against America, you are, in fact, admitting that your own economy, which is something I actually mentioned to President Nieto's predecessor, I said, you know, you're never going to get this solved unless you do something about the fact that you're still a socialist economy. You know, at the time, as I say, they still actually own Pemex. They have to solve those problems internally. We can't solve those problems for them. And they can try to pretend that, like every other third world country, that all their problems are a result of the United States. They're not. They're internal. They have a clear path to try and solve it, but it is not by simply bucking the United States.
So, Betsy, how do you think then that this will turn out? I mean, I think this is a major olive branch on the part of President Trump to send Tillerson and Kelly down there, particularly after that meeting was canceled abruptly by Nieto. So this feels like the carrot part of this drama, but it's going to come to a conclusion real soon.
President Donald Trump and Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly are sort of the ultimate bad cop, good cop pair. Just within a week of Trump and Nieto canceling their meeting on very acrimonious terms, Kelly actually had what appeared to be a very amicable meeting with Mexico's foreign minister. I think it's very likely that when you take diplomats and leaders who aren't elected, who don't have to worry about political pressure, who aren't necessarily the most visible public faces of their administrations, and you tell those guys to figure things out and try to hammer out deals, the negotiations can sometimes be more effective, more amicable, more diplomatic than they would be when you have two presidents of countries that are seeing their relationship be incredibly tense, trying to face down while, of course, the political realities that President Nieto faces in Mexico are quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Kelly and Tillerson are able to sort of play the good cop to Trump's bad cop when it comes to negotiating some sort of final deal here.
Let me add to that, Betsy. Here's the thing with Kelly, being the head of the Southern Command, former head of the Southern Command, he understands what's going on, and I think they're going to value what he has to say. As for Tillerson being a West Texas oil man, the one thing that Mexico should be able to do and should be able to rely on the United States on is to improve their own oil infrastructure so that they can stand on their own. And I think that these two men have the best interest, not only of U.S., but what they can do to help Mexico, having been around that country for so many years.